Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us in your evening. This is the 2024 Weather Year in Review with our very own Steve Glazier. Before we begin, I'd like to do the whole thing about reminding you about how to ask questions of Steve if any pop up in your mind. If you do have any questions, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That will populate our Q&A window where we can look at the questions that come in. Chat will be deactivated, of course. Feel free to enter questions anytime at all during the presentation, and we will be sure to address as many of the questions as we can, either during the presentation or at the very end. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenter. So thank you, Steve, for joining us. Everybody, Steve Glazier is a broadcast meteorologist currently working at NBC Connecticut in Hartford. He is going into his 17th year as a broadcast meteorologist after graduating from Linden State College in Vermont with a bachelor's degree in meteorology and an associate's degree in television news. Steve is a New England native and caught the weather bug when he was in first grade. So Steve, again, thank you very much for joining us, and I will turn the floor over to you.
All right, thanks, Gideon. Gideon, don't go too far. I might need a special guest appearance from Gideon a little bit later in this show, so to speak.
Very well. I'll be on standby.
Thanks for the intro, Gideon. I'm going to share my screen for this presentation here. And if at any point you can't see something or my connection goes out or whatnot, please let me know. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to chime in. Gideon will stop me. We kind of agreed, said, yeah, we'll stop things and take those questions at hand. So hello, everybody. So glad that you're here with us. This is one of my favorite times of the year to kind of reflect back on the year in review. Now, I don't think I'll be able to do as good of a job as Mr. Greg Carbon, who's recently retired up in Vermont, who formerly worked at WPC and SPC. He also gives a fantastic year in review. But I might take a page out of his book a little bit, because in other years, I've done it differently. I've given us the kind of the top 10 countdown. I think the last time I did this, it was more of a top 10 countdown, showcasing a lot of Weather Nation's top 10 weather events and playing out the videos, going down numerically to the number one event of the year. So instead of doing that top 10 countdown, I decided to go in chronological order this time around. So we'll kind of go through way back to last January, so almost a year ago, and then we'll go up to any more recent events. So as Gideon said, I have the title as a meteorologist at NBC Connecticut. Now that's new. That's only like 3 weeks old. This is a picture of me on my first day, a little over 3 weeks ago, back in mid-November, so even less than a month. And this is a new job for me. I was working at Weather Nation for a while, and I've worked at some other various markets. This is my first time back in local news since I was working at West Palm Beach, Florida. That was between 2015 and 2017. Then I went to Weather Nation for several years, which was awesome, which is where I covered a lot of these events for this year. But Connecticut is where I grew up. So this is a broadcast job in my home state, which is kind of cool. And a lot of my family and friends are already my biggest agents. So it's kind of surreal being back here. So that's me in front of the wonderful building. That building's only, I want to say like 15 years old. It's a fairly new building. So I always love a reflection on the year going back. It's always kind of nice to recap and go through these things. So this is actually one of my favorite pictures that I took on the Let's Begin picture tab, because when I was working at Weather Nation, I was in the beautiful state of Colorado. And if you haven't been, I would strongly encourage you to visit. It's a beautiful state. Denver is a fun city. Red Rocks is an awesome amphitheater. I mean, there's tons to do. But this was a sunset hike on a 14er. So the 14ers are those 14,000 foot mountains. And usually I'd be leaving at 5:30 or 6 a.m. to start the hike to beat afternoon thunderstorms. But I went up with a colleague of mine, leaving at about 4 or 5 p.m. to catch the sunset at about 8. And then we hiked down in the pitch black with strong headlamps. But it was awesome to see the sunset over the Rockies. So like I mentioned, we're going to go sequentially instead of like top 10 was number this and five was this, and number one was that. So we'll go back to last January. So when I look at these weather events, it's always a matter of, wow, that was a long time ago. This was the Pacific Northwest crippling ice storm, Arctic blasts, wallops of atmospheric rivers with strong winds. I mean, you kind of name it all. It was almost 2 weeks worth here. And this is one of the images to illustrate how much ice accumulated for some spots in the Pacific Northwest and especially in Oregon. So there were various events. I kind of lumped it into one time frame of this 12-day period. But this was one of the many billion-dollar disasters. You'll hear that through this presentation. A lot of these significant weather events of the year were also billion-dollar weather events. And there was up to 2 inches of ice accretion. That's crazy. Now, we get concerned as forecasters in terms of power outages. If there's anything more than, I'd say, about a third of an inch to maybe if you get up to a half inch, then we start to get some concern about power outages. I mean, this was 4 to 5 times that amount. So that's crippling. At its peak, there were 240,000 customers in Oregon without power. And imagine losing power during an ice storm during a very cold event. So that is a big issue. And there were 20 deaths associated to this weather event. And if Gideon hasn't run off and all of a sudden grabbed dinner just yet, I'd love to bring him back in because Gideon is joining us from Oregon. And thanks for doing this on the spot kind of thing, Gideon. But do you remember this event? Were you impacted?
I absolutely do, Steve. Where I lived, fortunately, I did not encounter extensive power outages, and I also had a wood stove as backup heat source. But I do remember going out, and it was a skating rink in the Willamette Valley floor where I'm at. This was the ice storm that finally inspired me to go out and get yak tracks for my shoes because yeah, there were a couple of close calls there when I did venture out. And I'm getting to the age where like if I fall, I'm not sure if I'll bounce back up again as readily. So yeah, that actually was kind of a concerning event. So yeah, noteworthy for us over here.
Okay, yeah, Gideon, thanks for that perspective. And you said Willamette Valley. So in this picture here, are you within this view, if you can see the screen,
Yep.
or are
So
you
I'm about a little bit south of Salem. I'm in Corvallis.
okay?
So yeah, if you head west from where I'm at, you'll hit Newport, Oregon, Central Oregon coast. So yeah, just a little bit south of Salem, maybe about oh geez, 30 minutes south of
Okay.
Salem on I-5.
All right, Gideon, thanks for that perspective and the memory. I'll let you get back to your duties of playing host of the AMS webinar. So thanks so much, Gideon. And
Thank you, Steve.
yeah, for sure. I always I put two and two together. I'm like, wait, Gideon, I think probably was impacted by that one. But you heard Gideon say the Willamette Valley right here. I remember this event because there was just this cold pocket of air that drained down the Columbia River toward the Pacific. And then it drained down the Willamette Valley in cold, dense air. It's like me in the morning. It doesn't want to move out of bed. It doesn't want to get going. Cold, dense air. It settles in these valleys and takes a while to scour out. So it just kind of held its place in there with multiple weather systems coming out. This map is from the if you ever like want to go down a rabbit hole, like what's that mountain range near my house or what lake or body of water is that? Go to the USGS. I always go to the USGS earthquake map and put on the terrain and then just zoom in. It's a good little feature. You can probably find it in other places, but that's where I usually go to. So we go to our next weather event, another winter related one, also in January of this year, which was the Arctic blast. And probably these are going to make the top 10 weather events at some point. We always get one of these. I mean, if you recall, I have to think because the winters kind of blend together. It was like 2 or 3 winters ago where we had that massive issue down in Texas. It was probably like 3 years ago, I would guess by now. But that was a huge, massive deal. So we get these. This wasn't as intense as that one, but this certainly affected several states, even all the way down to Tennessee and Georgia. What I found surprising by this one, maybe not so surprising to some. 41 deaths associated with this one. It wasn't just the cold, there was some ice, so there were some freezing rain and icy roads and that kind of component to things. So that's where some of the deaths could be attributed to, but another billion-dollar event. And like the one in the Pacific Northwest, this was close to $2 billion worth of some damage to homes and vehicles and businesses. On the map right here, you can see the black lines. Those are some of the isobars. So the lines of constant pressure. And whenever you see, we'll go back to that, the 1024, 1028, 1030, what catches my eye is about 1035. That's the surface pressure. So if we get into the winter months now through February, and if you're looking at pivotal weather, tropical tidbits, whatever you use for forecasting, and if you see like a 1035, 1040 high, that's a pretty, it's usually indicative of an Arctic air mass coming in, at least a cold Canadian air mass coming in. And that's something to look for. And in this case, you can see some of those temperatures, which were falling well below freezing pretty far south, which is always a reminder that, we're now in meteorological winter. We're 10 days in. Meteorological winter is December, January, and February. So if you heard people say, well, we're kind of expecting a mild winter, well, that is for the whole 3-month period. So about 90 days worth of that period from now through the end of February. When you run all those days, it's likely that most of the country will probably be at or above average for temperature, according to the Climate Prediction Center and NOAA for this winter's outlook. This is this winter's outlook, with some greater chances of the coldest weather in the high plains and the upper Midwest and the Northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest. But it is important to remember that that's the whole season, and there can be these weekly or even daily changes that can be very impactful. So you want to make sure that you're still paying attention to the local forecast. All right, we go into March, which is one of, if not the snowiest month on the Colorado Front Range. They get a very backloaded winter season. April is one of the snowiest months as well. So the Front Range gets a lot of spring snow. And this one was in, trying to think of when in March it was. I want to say maybe, well, actually, no, the third line gives it away, Pi Day. So it was right in the middle of the month, 314. So this came 3 years to the day after the Pi Day blizzard that walloped Denver back in 2021. Now, this event didn't give Denver as much snow. There was a decent amount, but the biggest snow totals came up in a town called Aspen Springs, Colorado. So that's north of Idaho Springs. That's kind of west-southwest of Boulder, 61.5 inches. And this was tied into some severe weather in the plains, which is pretty common to get during the wintertime. This image is just, to some, it might look claustrophobic. To me, it's like, wow, that is super cozy. If you're not in danger, you can get snowed in for that time of the year. So we'll get to the severe weather. Severe weather was a massive part of 2024's most significant weather events, but I have to get to outer space a little bit for some of these other events that were just so memorable and unique to this year. Now, these pictures on the right are my experience from the total solar eclipse in April of this year. Now, in 2017 was our last solar eclipse that we had in the US, and that was ranging from the Rockies and stretching southward to the Carolinas and the southeast coast. And in that case, I didn't see the full totality. I saw probably 80% of the coverage. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. You can see the shadows between leaves have little crescent shapes. You can do some experiments. And I heard people say, well, you really got to get into the total path to really experience it. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's, people always like, I always think that people are exaggerating. They're kind of talking it up. It's better than it is. But I got to say, after experiencing this one, if you get the chance to get in a total eclipse path, I would highly suggest it. And you have to be fully in, because this picture on the top left is at my dad's house in Vermont. I watched it in Vermont, which was surprisingly one of the sunniest locations. It's a typically like 80% chance of clouds in Vermont on any given April day. But this time it was sunny. And that picture on the top left, it quite honestly is about 1 or 2 minutes before the eclipse. So we're talking probably, I don't know the percentage, but 95%, probably in the 90% range of the sun covered by the moon. And then the bottom right is just a couple minutes later during totality. If you look closely, you can see planets coming out, bright spots of of stars appearing around the moon, around the sun and the moon. I just thought that was incredible. This was at about, what time was this? I want to say it was three, it was either 2 or 3 o'clock local time. I think it was three. So the sun was fairly still high in the sky, but it was just not pitch black, but super, super dark. So I would highly suggest it because even this little bit of a difference was really amazing. And I'm not sure if anybody else experienced this, but this vantage point, see how the snow is right in front of me. There were these little waves that danced along the snow since it was a light white color. And I didn't expect that. And it happened right like the seconds before totality. This little almost looks like if you're looking at a horizon, you see the like heat waves, looks a little blurry on the horizon. That's what it looked like on the snow racing across these little dark things racing across the snow. Super cool. So, okay, put on your calendar. Next solar eclipse is in 2 years. Actually, it's a little over a year. It's I think spring of 2026. And I think it's like Iceland. I think you might have to go to Spain. And then the next total solar eclipse in the US is 2044. The next lunar eclipse, so that's when the sun gets between, so that's when the Earth gets between the sun and the moon. So the moon turns like that, the reddish color. I believe that's March 2025. So this upcoming March in just a few months. Put that in your calendar. Then we had the aurora, the first of two major geomagnetic storms. Fantastic. This was the first of two that we had this year, and it was the strongest geomagnetic storm that we had in about 20 years, strongest one since 2003. That meant it was visible in many locations. I couldn't believe the sight from Florida, and I think even like Key West and palm trees and seeing the northern lights, which I thought was just impossible. But this was registered as a G5 on the geomagnetic scale, and that is the highest. It's like your Saffir-Simpson scale or your enhanced Fujita scale for hurricanes and tornadoes. The 5 is the strongest. Now, it does mean it can have a significant effect on the utility grid, but radio and airlines. But I think that the impacts more or less widespread were more minimal in that categories, which is always perfect to get that sight. And then we get to the severe weather season. This is inevitably going to make every top significant weather event in a year in review show that we do. This severe weather season, though, was even more intense than other seasons, though. I mean, when I was looking through to give this presentation, I was looking a lot through the NOAA and NCEI's billion-dollar disasters. They do an excellent job, excellent website, keeping it up to date basically real time what's been going on across the country this year. And they totaled 17 separate events for billion-dollar disasters from severe weather, which is crazy, all the way from January to July. So you think about an eight months if you include all of them individually. For 17, so you're about 2 per month, which is wild. A total of $46.6 billion. So there is so much severe weather that, this presentation would have to be a couple hours long if I were to get to every one. So I kind of lumped it in to the severe weather season, which is kind of a vague one, but I think for the sake of time, it'll work well. There were 51 fatalities from this, and the tornado count as of this presentation was over 1,700 tornadoes. Average annually is about 1,100. So an incredibly active season. Those numbers still probably changing through the end of the year as any additional storm systems pop up and any surveys go on. But there were a couple of other significant events on the right of your screen. You see some here, April 27th of this year across Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. All the red dots showing the tornado reports, and then all of the blue dots, the wind reports, which we had a lot of those on the 6th of May in similar areas, Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, into Nebraska, Iowa, the red dots shown there as well. Now, a couple of other noteworthy severe storms from this year. There were several EF4 tornadoes. There was an EF4 in Marietta, Oklahoma in April, in Barnsdall and Bartlesville, Oklahoma in May, and then in Greenfield, Iowa in May. There were particularly dangerous situations, or PDS watches and warnings all over the place with the severe weather season. And with that, we also had some derechos. And one of them that was a significant weather event of this year that caught my attention was the one along the Gulf Coast in May. This one ranged from Texas to Florida, which is quite uncommon to get one that far south. To get that kind of wind energy way down to the south. They're probably more likely in the higher latitudes, especially during the month of May, which is, typically we see the severe weather shift just a little bit farther north. But this one was all along the Gulf Coast region from Houston and all the way down to the east and southeast. In fact, the top right image shows from NASA Houston kind of after that derecho compared to before in terms of the nighttime light image. You can see how much of the city was dark after that from wind damage and power outages. And then up into the upper Midwest, into the upper Mississippi Valley around the Quad Cities. Those are some of the preliminary storm reports coming in from the National Weather Service office out of the Quad Cities around Davenport, of the derecho in May, late May, from Nebraska to Illinois. And there were some embedded tornadoes associated with that, but that was another $1 billion disaster and winds exceeding 100 miles per hour down from the Gulf Coast, which was wild. And then we get to, and this event is fairly specific because it impacted a very local community, but because this community was impacted by two significant weather events, I decided to include in this presentation. That's Ruidoso, New Mexico, which had the South Fork fire blended with another named fire here that began in June of this year, and it quickly spread, burned houses. There were 1,000 structures destroyed, and many of which were homes as well. And then we get into the monsoon season. Now, the monsoon season in the Southwest gives us most of our rain for the year. It goes from mid-June to late September in places like New Mexico, Colorado, the Four Corners, even to Nevada and California. However, you had two things happen here. The fire ran through parts of Ruidoso, New Mexico, and then the monsoonal rains came and triggered multiple flash flood emergencies. There were multiple significant flood events because of debris flows. So when you have a wildfire, if you ever hear of debris flows and burn scar flooding, you get a fire to burn and scorch the land. And thereafter, even as many as the next 2 or 3 years after, you can get flooding a lot more easily because the ground cannot accept the rain as easily as an unburnt or naturally flowing water system there in the ecosystem. So that was one event that was particular to Ruidoso, but that caught my attention in terms of, you have fire, then floods. And that's what we have seen as of late, these extremes. So we'll talk about the extremes even where I am now in Connecticut this year, a little bit later in this presentation. Now it's time to talk tropics. And in tropics, unlike the severe weather season, which I kind of lumped in together, this one I went through the really our 5 landfalling storms and our 5 landfalling hurricanes. It was a busy hurricane season again. We had many named storms and many landfalling hurricanes. But right around the cusp of June and July, Hurricane Beryl made history as the earliest Category 5 on record on July 1st. And that was one of the many rapid intensifications that we saw this hurricane season. Now, if you're following along with the coverage, in the island of Carriacou, it's in the southeast, it's in the Leeward Islands of the Caribbean, so way down in the southeastern Caribbean. Category 4 landfall. At the time, I was working at Weather Nation, so a couple of the field correspondents who were reporting from there just showed such widespread destruction from that. A lot of the scenes we are used to kind of seeing in the past several hurricane seasons. And then after the Caribbean, it made landfall as a strengthening Category 1 storm near Houston. A couple of these hurricane landfalls were different. A lot of them were 1s and 2s, but they kind of felt different. Beryl's one that kind of felt on the stronger side of a 1 in the Houston area because it was gaining momentum and it did spawn 50-plus tornadoes across Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. And then later, the next month, we had Hurricane Debbie. Now, this was also a Category 1 hurricane, felt a little different than Beryl did, And these are the satellite presentations. So one's infrared and this one's on the after landfall on kind of a visible blend here. But Debbie kind of felt a little bit different. Debbie was unique because it actually made two landfalls in the southeast United States over the course of a few days. The first was the Steinhatchee, Florida location as a Category 1 hurricane. Then a weekend, and it reemerged over the water, made landfall again as a tropical storm in South Carolina, which you don't see too often, but with that slow movement, that definitely gave us a flooding concern. There's 10 inches of rainfall, more than 10 inches in numerous states in the southeast. And then sometimes, these years, I think back to, I think it was Ida, and I think that was August as well. It might have been a little bit later, but that was one that brought the significant rainfall to New York City. And someone correct me if I'm wrong, 'cause sometimes the hurricanes and so many of the I name storms, they can blend together. But that was one several years ago that had a far inland reaching impact. Isaias was another I name storm that brought a lot of tornadoes up into the mid-Atlantic region after a landfall down in the south. So this particular storm, Debbie, brought an EF1 tornado into Buffalo, New York, which is crazy to think of all of the impacts with Debbie there. Then we get Francine. Francine was a hurricane Category 2 making landfall on a more rural part of Terrebonne Parish in Louisiana, in southeast Louisiana. It did produce a half foot of rain in 7 states, and this was an interesting hurricane because we went through, after we had Debbie, of course, it got off to this massive start with Beryl. And it was like, okay, earliest Cat 5. We knew it was going to be a busy hurricane season. All the forecasts were talking about how busy of a season it was. And then we got to Debbie, and then we had this long, quiet stretch. And like every year, you get one of these quiet stretches, and it's like, okay, is the nail in the coffin for the hurricane season? This kind of ended that really quiet stretch that we had through much of August and September, and then October just got September into October got incredibly busy. And the event, if we were to put probably if we were to say, the number one weather event of 2024, it'd probably be Helene. It was just such a catastrophic storm, and there was a lot to it because this visible imagery shows on the right the eye of Helene, just south of the Big Bend of Florida, but all of that cloud cover, and there was a stationary front draped in the southeast, which made it rain for a few days in North Carolina and Tennessee before Helene's rain even arrived. So it was raining for probably upwards of a half week to a week in total. And I mean, you're no stranger to this. We had just that catastrophic flooding across the Appalachian Mountains. And according to NCEI, which has at least 200 deaths associated with this, even a little bit more than that. I think it was 225, maybe more. That was the deadliest U.S. hurricane since Katrina in 2005, which caught my attention. I was like, wow, I didn't realize that it was that high up on the list in terms of deadly impact in the U.S. for landfall since Katrina. That's for the U.S. alone. Puerto Rico and Maria had more in 2017. But for the mainland U.S., this was the worst in that category since Katrina. And that was just a storm that we'll always remember, a name that'll easily get retired and will, probably would be if I was counting down to number one, would be the number one event. Milton was, radially kind of a small hurricane, but massively explosive. You may have heard terms of this is at the limit of nature's ability in terms of the extent, mathematically, the extent of how strong a hurricane can get. It rapidly intensified to a Category 5 hurricane in the southern Gulf of Mexico, 180-mile-an-hour winds, 897 millibar pressure. It was wild. Now, it maintained a lot of that strength as it went toward the Tampa Bay area, which the Hurricane Center this year did a fantastic job on its track. If you ever go back to the track verification for its position, they were on it again this year, so kudos to them. But a Category 3 major hurricane, 120-mile-an-hour winds near Siesta Key, Florida, in the Tampa Bay area. Tampa more or less dodged a lot of it, though there was significant damage. You saw Tropicana Field, where the Tampa Bay Rays played, where the roof was just shredded. So Tampa Bay did get a significant hit, probably not the worst blow, but this spawned dozens of tornadoes. Where I formerly worked was in Southeast Florida in the Palm Beach market. And Palm Beach County, up to the Treasure Coast, had significant tornadoes. They were deadly tornadoes, and they were long tracked for a hurricane. That's what I'll remember from Hurricane Milton this year. So a lot really in the chunk of the year with all the severe weather, with all the hurricanes, it was definitely tough. But ending on a bit of a lighter note, we had our second brilliant show of the aurora. It was in October, so that's a couple of months ago. This was the second very, very strong geomagnetic storm. And if you missed it, maybe if it was cloudy or you just happened to not get outside that night, I wouldn't worry too much. The Space Weather Prediction Center and other organizations and forecasters are predicting a solar maximum, which is fairly cyclical and fairly easy to project, but a solar maximum through next year. So it's quite likely we'll get more events like this, but I would encourage you to check out the Space Weather Prediction Center. It's a really cool, I've been there. It's in Boulder, Colorado, and it's a really cool website. So of course, I'm going to be bound to leave out some events of this year because there were some homegrown major stories. And if you were impacted by, let's say, a significant flooding event in your town, that's very, very incredibly memorable for you. But for the nationwide outlook, it might have been under the radar, so to speak. So there were some other events that I wanted to mention that you may have been wondering about if they'd make the presentation. And if you remember back to last winter, early this year, there were those massive grass and wildland fires in the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles. That was a huge, huge deal and burned even Texas's largest amount of acreage on record. In January, there were some significant tornadoes in the Panama City Beach area of Florida. Now, here locally, I'd mentioned Ruidoso, New Mexico had the fire and then the floods. Well, here in Connecticut, we had significant flooding in August, where some towns southwest of me, in southwestish Connecticut, had significant flooding. And then after that event, they went the next 3 months with hardly any rain, and a severe drought developed, which we're still in a severe drought. And luckily, we have a massive rain event tomorrow coming to hopefully quench that. But it just goes to show that, we're seeing some locations impacted by these things of significant drought. Then all of a sudden, massive rain events that help, but they can flood. We also had the extreme heat. Every year we're bound to have the extreme heat. A lot of the East Coast and a lot of the West Coast had some of their warmest weather on record. The central U.S. wasn't as intense, but it was still warm. And then we had the recent bomb cyclone, which was just about a week or two in the Pacific Northwest. So feel free in the chat if something impacted you that was not on there, feel free to drop it in there. But otherwise, that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. I worked through a lot of the events at Weather Nation, and now I'm more local. Though I'll be paying attention to the significant weather events. They're hard not to. Hopefully not too many. And if you ever want to reach out to me for anything that you need, if you need help with a school project, if you need help with, if you want me to talk for your class virtually, you want to become a weather band member, promote that. Here are my contact information. You can find me on social media. I'm doing a little bit more Facebook, a little bit less X since it's been changing lately. I haven't joined, what is that new one? The Blue Sky or whatever it's called. I haven't done that yet. And there's my email on there. So anyway, thanks for having me, everybody. Thanks for following along with the presentation. Kept it a little bit short, about a half hour, but I'm happy to stay here and answer any questions.
Yeah, Steve, first thing that we got here for you is you got complimented on your tree in the background. So
yes, good. I'm wondering, these lights, these colorful lights, like I liked them as a kid, but they mess with my eyes now. I might be trending to white light.
Yeah.
So maybe you can drop it in the chat if you like the colored lights, the white lights. This might be my last year with these colored ones. They do funky things to my eyes.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I've transitioned to the white Christmas tree lights. It's just easier, less migraines or headaches or whatever.
I know.
Yeah. Also, we got a question here, Steve. Joseph was asking if one could get a copy of your presentation.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. I'll send it along. I don't know if
Excellent.
I send it to you, Gideon, or just directly to someone.
Yeah, I don't know, Joseph, if you are listening in still, Steve, if you could send me that presentation, that'd be great. But
Yeah.
also, I think you put your contact information there, so
Yeah, it's right
maybe
there on the screen.
Joseph can
Yep.
contact you directly. Great. Thank you, Steve. And then also, Kevin T. Noble asks if you remember him.
Oh, of course. Yeah, Kevin was a Kevin, thanks for being here, by the way. Kevin would chime in when I worked at Weather Nation a lot because he watched quite a bit being from Florida and how active it is. So, yep. Hello, Kevin. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Miss giving you your forecast there in Florida.
Oh, yeah, great to be able to connect on another platform. Let's see. There's another person that asks here, Steve, what are the steps to becoming a broadcast meteorologist or an AMS band member?
Ah, okay. Well, let's go back to my little opening slide here. Um, yeah, so I would say if you can attend and get a degree in meteorology, I'd encourage you to do that. So there are a lot of universities you can do. You can do some online programs too for meteorology. It is a lot of work. It's very, you know, not labor intensive, but mentally intensive. A lot of math and science. But if you love weather, and it's not just broadcasting, broadcasting is changing, and a lot of my colleagues are actually kind of changing out of broadcasting to do either some other private weather work or just even different things, just because uh, there's a lot that goes into the demand. It's a labor of love for sure. So you can do a lot of different sectors like the National Weather Service, but picking a sector is good. If you want to work for the government with the National Weather Service, or if you want to work for a local TV station, which is a private weather industry, or you can also, through the AMS, they offer the Certified Consulting Meteorologist, which is the CCM. So you can work as a like a meteorologist in a court case and testify in certain cases, or do private weather forecasting for companies that need it. So there's a lot that goes into it. Amazon has a bunch of meteorologists, utility and electric companies have meteorologists, airlines, you name it. Even I met one of the meteorologists that worked for the PGA Tour, which I thought was a kind of a cool job because I love golf. So they're responsible for, blowing the horn, making the call if they need to. I think it was a few Masters ago, or whenever the Masters, they had to bump it up because of some severe weather coming or something impactful. So that was cool. But there's a lot you can do. Academia too.
Great. Thank you, Steve. And
Yeah.
then for the person that asked about being an AMS band member,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
here is the link. I just put it on our chat for everyone so they can check that out.
Guess I'll stop sharing. Okay.
Next question I have is also from Joseph Jackson, Steve. It says here he teaches weather in fifth grade science. Is there a simulator where you can turn fronts slash air masses on its side so you can see what is going on in three-dimensionally?
Um, Probably like in real time. I know there's probably the Noah's got Jetstream, which is like a toolkit for teachers online, which is nice. NOAA and the National Weather Service offers Jetstream, but also like in real time, there are some programs like you kind of have to know what you're looking at, but there's a Buff Kit is what I use. It's BUFKIT. And it's a 2D view. So basically you're getting kind of soundings from, let me see if I can share this here on the screen. You're kind of getting soundings from the ground up, so you can get a little bit of a 2D view that way. Hang on real quick, I'll just share this. So that's one way you can. Let's see. So on your screen here is this sounding tonight from, I think it's from Albany. So this is kind of a 2D view, or I don't know, it's not really 3D, but it's the bottom is the surface, and then the troposphere is up by the 200 mark. Well, the tropopause before you get to the stratosphere. So that's kind of a little bit of a, and what's neat about this is that you can actually see, can go down to New York City. You can see in the wintertime, one thing when you're forecasting precipitation type, there's called a warm nose. So toward the bottom, you can kind of see how it sticks out like a big schnoz right there. It's a warm nose, so warm air. You can really see in Albany probably more. That's actually not bad right there. This right here is it's close. This is probably a freezing rain profile, if not a sleet. It's got the warmer layer above, about 5,000 feet, and it's only 26 degrees at Gray, Maine. So that's tonight. So that's interesting. So that's a 2-day way of looking at cold fronts and stuff. That's on the Storm Prediction Center website. I could go through these websites like all day. This stuff's pretty fun.
Thank you, Steve. We also have a question here from Richard Halterman. Do you think the increase in tornadoes is from better detection, landfalling hurricanes, or a warmer climate?
Oh, so yeah, we had a lot of tornadoes from the hurricanes, which were pretty wild, especially when we had Milton. That was pretty crazy. So that bumped it up. I think there is better detection too. Since the radar system went in and we can detect debris signatures on there, and people have phones everywhere and people report things more. So definitely more of that. When it comes to warming climate, I've heard kind of some inconclusive things about tornadoes because you do still need like a differential in air mass.
Mhm.
We're kind of in a warmer climate, one that can hold more moisture. So that's one big component of the air mass. You still need a cold surge and some wind shear to come in, jet stream. But so we've kind of seen, I think what we have seen I think the trends are more weaker tornadoes, so more tornadoes that are EF 0, 1s, 2s, and less of the EF 3s, 4s, and 5s. I'm no tornado expert, so don't quote me on it. I believe that's what the trend has been. But yeah, warm with a warming climate and the more moisture, that is a big component of it because you can get some more of that instability if you have, a strong cold front coming in.
Great, thank you, Steve. And next one, we have a question from Brandon Clowers, who is also an advocate of Mississippi State and its great meteorology program, it looks like here, one of the best in the country. But Brandon asks, what are your thoughts about this winter season upcoming?
This winter. So we're changing out from last year, where we're going into this um, kind of a La Nina driven winter. So I think it'll be different from last year. I think we'll get a few more of these cold plunges. So, from the Great Lakes, High Plains, even down to the southeast, we've already had some cold. So I think that's a piece that'll be. Let me share my screen for the presentation. I'll just go back to the winter outlook for this year. I think it is. I think it's pretty good for this winter outlook. We see the cold in the high plains and barrel down into the central U.S. and then much warmer down to the south. I think we'll probably get plenty of rainstorms here, unfortunately, in the East Coast, maybe one or two snowstorm potentials. And then the Pacific Northwest, the best chance of some of that wintry weather. I think this forecast is good here from the Climate Prediction Center. We've already seen very warm air in the west and southwest. But in terms of the polar vortex and the bomb cyclone, to be honest, I'm not sure. Those things are you can usually tell some patterns a few weeks out. So I just have to wait and see. I I have this belief like that the atmosphere is always trying to equal itself out. You have a cold in the poles, the warmth in the equator, and these weather systems are just trying to distribute everything and try to balance it out so the poles don't keep getting colder and the equator doesn't keep getting warmer. So I feel like for some areas like where I am in the Northeast, we just had this drought. So now we're starting to turn a lot wetter. So I think it will be kind of a wetter winter here in New England where I am. But like in the case tomorrow, it's going to be in the 50s, maybe even 60. So it'll be rain. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed for a couple of big snowstorms. They're always kind of fun from a weather perspective to watch.
Great. Well, if anything happens over here in Oregon, Steve, I'll take pictures and send it to you
Okay.
for sure. So, um, Brendan also asked Steve, he says here, it seems like nationwide, we've been getting less snowstorms than in the past. He remembers back in the 90s as a kid, we had more snow chances than we do now. Why is that perhaps?
I know, and I think that's just because our temperatures are warming. I was just looking at some graphics from Climate Central, and Climate Central provides a lot of interesting graphics, interesting stories, and they do a lot of research on what seasons are changing, especially because I grew up as a kid in the 90s in Connecticut, and I remember just shoveling so much snow. We had so many school closures and delays. And then now we're like tomorrow we're getting a lot of rain out of it. And according to Climate Central, winter is the season that is probably warming most if you were to compare it to summer, spring, and fall with
Mm.
our seasons. So I think that winter is already one of those seasons that is creeping up the average temperature. I've seen even a couple of this year has been really warm too globally. So I think especially when you're talking snow, when you need that critical cool temperature, if we're you know our if we're warming and a warming trend, we're saying less chances of it. It could still happen for sure, but yeah, it's getting tougher. Um, but that said, we can still get some big ones. But yeah, I remember when I was a kid too. We didn't really get a break from these storms in the 90s in the Northeast and New England. We got a lot of them. So they're kind of getting harder to come by.
And Doug LeCompte here would like to present the recent lake effect snows and the record autumn drought and wildfires in the Northeast as for consideration for your top 10 list.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Doug. Those ones are, yeah, I know there was always a lot of significant weather events, and I probably left out a couple of them for sure too. But yeah, recently, recently it's been a lot for, I know flooding has been very, very big. Our rain events have been intense, and the severe weather this year was pretty intense too. If you do want to see if like you can always search the billion-dollar disasters this year. It does take a lot to get to a billion-dollar disaster, so smaller geographic events might not make it, but that's a neat one. And then it's interesting if you do, I don't know the site offhand, but if you do a search of NOAA NCEI November summary, like just for instance, November 2024, and do a Google search, every month they put out this map of the US, and it's a really nice looking graphic, and it has the highlights of that month, significant weather events, and you can just break it down by any month of the year recently since they began doing it. And it's really cool. I think they go into detail too of like this is how much warmer and cooler and wetter and drier it was compared to average. So again, I think if you Google search like a November 2024 monthly summary NCEI, something like that, it should pop up. You might be able to find it.
I put up what I think is a link,
Okay,
Steve.
I'll go check it out.
Yeah. And while you're looking, Steve,
Yeah.
Scott Haas says he's been watching the news of the SoCal fires around Malibu. This seems late in the season. To what
Yeah.
would you attribute this lack of December rain in SoCal? Or is this part of a specific pattern or some sort of weird anomaly?
I think it's some sort of weird anomaly because this is the season when California gets a lot of its rain. And, you have these coastal storms coming in, and this is the wet season. So this is a drier pattern coming up for California. I was just talking to a meteorologist, listening to a meteorologist talk from, I want to say the Bay Area.
Mhm.
We had an NBC call last week. They were saying how dry it was. So I think it's like an anomaly. It's just based on those storm tracks. Typically during La Nina, you see them rise a little bit in latitude. Like El Nino is going to favor the Southern California to Florida, Southern U.S. track, and La Nina favors up toward Washington a little bit more. But we can still get them down to the south, so that could be a factor. But it just seems a little bit drier. And then the fires. I know after leaving Weather Nation, I got tunnel vision back into local, the local scene here in Connecticut. So I'm like, so I haven't been checking as much of the national. But in California, the worst of the fire season is between, I want to say August and probably August and November. It's still when it's dry, you can get
Mhm.
downslope winds, and it's still pretty warm. So this would be pretty late in December to get that, in my opinion. But it could just be, the lack of rainfall so far in the wet season, or should be my guess. Because the wet season is probably going to be wettest there from, nowish to February for
Mhm.
most of it.
Great. Well, Steve, thank you so much for bringing this to us. Thank you for everything, taking the
Yeah.
time to put this together for our audience. Yes, audience, this webinar will be available to anybody in the weather band, actually anybody in the public now, because we are open access. So just give me some time to process the video and get it posted up. I'll try to do that by later on this evening. And yeah, if you go to our website and look at our weather or our webinar page, you should see it up there. So yeah, with that being said, Steve, do you have any last parting comments?
No, I just appreciate everybody coming out. I know it's kind of late here at East Coast time. It's almost 9, so thanks for taking the night out to hang with me. I'm just looking up real quick while you were chatting the precipitation type over in Maine because I pulled up that weather sounding from Gray, Maine.
Uh,
Curious if they're getting freezing fog, snow, and freezing rain. So it's a wintry mixed mess up there.
Yuck.
So I was just doing a little forecast verification, Gideon, but I don't have anything else to add. I just wanted to
Quite
say
the
thank you for
professional.
everybody.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, thank you so much, Steve. And we're looking forward to having this again around about the same time next year if we can pull it off.
Oh yeah, you can count on me. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you, my friend. And with that being said, thank you, audience, for joining us. Have a great and safe rest of your night. And we will see you at the next AMS Weather Band webinar. Good night.